Welcome back. We are visiting with one of our most distinguished and most admired colleagues. His name is Captain James Fanell, United States Navy retired, the former Chief of Intelligence for the U.S. Pacific Fleet. Jim, we were talking before the break about the encirclement of Taiwan and Chinese ambitions perhaps now being amped up to use military force to seize it. You've been among those who've been warning about some of China's ambitions even further to the east, including our state of Hawaii. You lived and worked there for many years. Tell us what the threat is as you see it emerging to Hawaii, Pearl Harbor, and other assets there.
Well, Frank, when I retired in 2015, I was already aware of the Chinese designs of their submarine force to operate what we call the third island chain, which is out to the Pacific, out to Hawaii. And so the idea that China has designs on operating in and around Hawaii are not unseen before. They've come out and spied on the exercise Rim of the Pacific, or RIMPAC. They did it in 2012. They did it in 2014. They did it again in 2018. So they've been operating with intelligence collection ships in those waters. They have designs for their submarine force to operate out there. And then with their ballistic missile force, they have the capacity now to strike Hawaii with, submerged launch ballistic missiles from their submarines, like the Jin class, with the JL2 or the upcoming JL3. They have the capacity to launch land-based ballistic missiles and even air-launched with some of the capacity they're going to have with their new strategic stealth bomber. So the idea that they would put Hawaii at risk is something that's real and tangible. And I think it even goes beyond that. I think the Chinese have designs to operate off of our west coast. And they've said that, we want to operate off your coast like you operate off of our coast. And so I think we sometimes, and just I think 2 years ago, we had a big surface action group of over 6 ships that passed the international date line and were operating closer to Hawaii than they were to Guam. So these moves towards Hawaii.
Chinese flotilla you're talking
Chinese
about.
Navy has been expanding out there, and so it's not gotten a lot of attention, but they've been slowly expanding, much in the same way that they did 10 years ago when they were expanding into the South China Sea and into the Philippine Sea past Okinawa.
Yeah, making promises that, as you say, they wouldn't use those forays or the products of them for military purposes. Jim, part of the reason why we have not responded more robustly to these developments is, of course, this foreign policy known as engagement. You've been sharply critical of it, and I think rightly so, for many, many years. One of the forces at work behind persistent pursuit of, a practice that effectively simply makes China richer and more powerful, somehow on the thought that it's going to become more like us, or at least more benign, is a practice known as elite capture, a form of political warfare. Our friend Peter Schweitzer has written about it quite impressively in his new book, Red-Handed. Talk a little bit, if you would, particularly from the point of view of an intelligence professional, as well as a deeply thoughtful strategist when it comes to contending with the Chinese Communist Party. That as more and more evidence comes to light from, among other places, Hunter Biden's laptop, the commander-in-chief of the United States himself has been deeply compromised, or, if you would, captured by our mortal enemy, the Chinese Communist Party.
Yeah, Frank, this revelation, it's been going on for a couple of years, but now that seems to be accepted that this laptop is a legitimate piece of evidence. And the reports of the email exchanges between Hunter Biden and, essentially being an employee of a Chinese state-owned enterprise, electric or petroleum company, and having communications with the chief of their intelligence This is all things that seem very, very hard to comprehend. I served for, like you said, for many, many years, and with many, many thousands and thousands of people that had clearances, and we had to get updates and polygraphs and any type of association with anybody from an adversary nation like China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, even friendly nations. Some kinds of associations are required to be reported and analyzed, and you're judged on whether or not you would be allowed to keep your clearance. And in most cases, you would not be. People would be lose their clearances and be removed from the service, at least in any position of authority over classified information. So the idea that
Especially if money was changing hands from that intelligence service to the individual who had these clearances. No.
right, and the fact that there's this person is associated with the former vice president and now the president, it's hard to comprehend why there isn't a just a massive hue and cry for we need to investigate this. Forget what party you're from. It's really dangerous. The idea that we have people at that level that are now, for the first point, they didn't even reveal it when they came into office or when they were running, or it's hard to comprehend. Anybody else that would have had anything like this would be in Leavenworth breaking big rocks into little rocks.
In the brig. I was very pleased to say Mark Levin on his show on Fox News last night, effectively joined me, among others, in calling for just such an investigation. It's long overdue. And frankly, the country is in very serious peril, I believe, as a result of this compromise at the highest levels. And by the way, in a number of strata below the president as well, something that I encourage people to take a look at, accountabilityinitiative.org, for a lot more documentation on it. Jim Fanell, you mentioned that one of Xi Jinping's priorities has been a Belt and Road Initiative. This is, I think of it as a colonial empire build out, from which, yes, to foster powerful economic ties and to help create infrastructure around the world. But in particular, it seems increasingly clear, from which to project power by the Chinese Communist Party's People's Liberation Army as well. Talk a little bit about how this has come about, the political warfare and corruption, elite capture that has generated it, and very quickly, if you would, its implications.
Right. The Belt and Road, as Xi titled it back in 2013, was the One Belt, One Road. And for the last essentially 9 years, he's been expanding China's economic involvement throughout South Asia, the South China Sea, through the Indian Ocean, across Central Asia, and essentially offering up money to small countries that couldn't afford it to give them things for infrastructure, and that they would then allow the PRC to have access to their markets, access to their produce, their resources, and also access to their bases. And so we're now starting to see, people like to say America's got over 700 bases around the world, even though some of those bases are pet cemeteries and things of that nature. The reality is that China is on the march to set up this network of spoken hub, where they can send their ships, send their aircraft, and have the resources there. They can defend their interests with their military, and they can expand their power, as you said, very much like a colonial or mercantilist power, where they control the means of production, the resources, and if anybody in the local area gets out of the way, then they can come in and use their military. And we're seeing that happen. It's just spreading like a cancer across the world.
Metastasizing. It's a very, very apt phrase for it. Captain, we have to leave it at that. This is a topic to which we will return with your help, I hope, in the very near future. Few people have as clear a vision of it as you do, and we so appreciate your sharing it with us. Come back to us again soon, sir. Next up, we're going to speak with the CEO, Rebecca Weber, of a terrific grassroots organization, the Association for Mature American Citizens, about political warfare here at home.